Greetings from sunny Arizona, where today's high temperature was 81 degrees. My name is Jessica Bassford. I'm a freshman biology teacher in Glendale, Arizona, and I'm an MAT secondary education student at National Louis University. My topic today is formative assessment and designing individualized instruction. My focus question was, how can formative assessment and assessment tracking by students and teachers aid in individualized instruction designed to increase learning? I feel that I've always been really strong at formative assessment in my classroom through different techniques, but I haven't used it to create more individualized instruction and differentiation in my classroom as I probably should. And so I wanted to research ways to do that and what is out there right now, what other teachers are doing. Many times people think that assessments are just tests and quizzes to give grades and to show what students are doing in class. We need to use assessments to also create future planning in our classroom on a daily level and on a semester level. Assessments should be used to improve our instruction so that we're able to reteach if needed, monitor our students' progress to know what concepts and skills they're getting and what concepts and skills they need remediation activities on, to help student growth, and to evaluate student achievement. Formative assessments have 3 key points: to monitor learning, meaningful feedback, and to guide instruction. There are many different types of formative assessments. Some teachers use quizzes as formative assessments. Some use exit tickets or checks for understanding on the way out. I've seen door slaps. I've actually done door slaps where you take Post-it notes and students write their answers on them for the day's lesson and then slap them to your door. They like that a lot because they get to actually physically do something as they leave the classroom. There's also checks for understanding. In an interview you'll see a little bit later in their presentation where a teacher has taught our students ASL sign language signs, and our students show different signs to show how they're doing with their curriculum. So there's lots of different things teachers can do for formative assessment. It's any type of assessment that is during instruction and during a unit, not at the end of a unit, which is summative assessment. Like I said earlier, formative assessment is used to monitor learning. A lot of times we think that monitoring the learning process is only done by teachers, but that shouldn't be the case. When we monitor learning, teachers have jobs. They need to monitor the effectiveness of the lesson, the comprehension of concepts as a class. So as a class, what skills are we getting? What concepts are we getting? What do we need to go over as a whole class? And then we also need to check comprehension of individual students. So what students may need remediation while what students may need enrichment. So we need to look at the class as a whole, but also individual students. And we need to use formative assessment to monitor what we need to do for future instruction. However, teachers shouldn't be the only ones monitoring the learning process. Students should be using formative assessments to check their understanding of concepts and learning and how they feel the class is going. They should also be checking their progress in their class goals and their individual goals and looking at what skills they need to work on and what skills they are achieving success in. When we monitor learning, we can do that in a few different ways. The examples you're seeing in front of you are a teacher tracker that I use to track weekly quizzes and a student tracker to track weekly quizzes. So on the left, you're seeing all of my data. Numbers in pink are 0 to 5, so 50% or lower. Yellows are 60%, so it's a passing D. And then anything green is a C or higher. So you can see some students do very well in the green category the entire time. Some say pink the whole time. And I use that information to kind of figure out what's going on. This student actually later on ended up being moved to a different level in the course because it was too fast-paced for them. Whereas we can see some students start off kind of slow, but then eventually get the hang of things and come into retake, and you see that mastery level. So this student started off in yellow and pink and eventually ended in all green. Not only do I use this data on the left for myself, but I also show the students. So currently only their ID numbers are showing. Their names have been hidden. So I'll show them this so they can see how they're doing and how the whole class is doing. However, they also have trackers in their binders that they keep. So you can see this student records the date for each quiz. These are their vocab quizzes and how they do. When they get a 5 or below, they mark it red. When they get a 6, they mark it yellow. And a 7 or higher, they mark it green. This student didn't master the concepts or the vocab words on the first try, so they came in the next day or the day after and took it again. All my students are allowed to retake quizzes until they hit mastery. So that, I think, is really important. Sometimes we think, you've taken the quiz, you failed, okay, that's it. We can't just let students fail a quiz and then move on. We've got to push them towards mastery. So if it means retaking the quiz and coming in for tutoring, then that's what we need to do. So as I just mentioned, we need to do something with all of that data. We can't just let it sit there. So far, I've used the data to help come up with class goals and individual goals, and students are loving it. I use whole class goals through PBIS. We use PBIS at our campus, which stands for Positive Behavior Interventions and Supports, and it's a reward system for reaching steps in our goals. I also have students create individualized goals, and when they meet an individualized goal, they can use that to add on to their whole class goal. I think that formative assessments, from the research I've done, also give students meaningful feedback, whereas teachers are giving feedback to the students. And that information shows them, 1, that you care about their progress, 2, that you're actually looking at how they're doing, and 3, that you're willing to have a conversation with them to better their learning experience. It's also really important that as teachers, we use this information to make future instructional decisions. And like I said, that's something that I've struggled with. When we talk about feedback, it's important to remember that feedback needs to be meaningful. Brookhart says that feedback is meaningful when it addresses these 4 qualifications: timing, amount, mode, and audience. If it's an information of whether a fact is right or wrong, it needs to be immediate feedback. So that needs to be a yes, that information is correct because, or no, that information is actually incorrect because of this. You can delay feedback for comprehensive thinking and processing, but it's always important to remember we don't want to delay feedback too long so that the meaning no longer has any effect. You also want to look at the amount of feedback you're giving and making sure that it really just focuses on the major learning goals. If you're doing a scientific paper trying to determine the pH of a certain liquid, you want to focus on the scientific specifications. If a word is misspelled here or there, it's important to correct it, but it's not important to dwell on that. The main focus should be the scientific concept. You also want to focus on the mode, whether you're talking with the student individually, whether you're giving them written feedback, or whether you're demonstrating something. If it's a skill the student's having trouble with, like setting up a lab experiment, you may want to demonstrate that lab. Or if it's something that they're just not understanding completely when they're doing a task, you may want to talk with that student individually. And then you also want to think about the audience. Is the student needing individual feedback one-on-one? So is it something that maybe just relates to them? Or is it something that the group or the class could benefit from? So when we talk about guiding instruction, we need to remember that there are 2 main paths our instruction can go after a formative assessment: enrichment or remediation. If students are grasping the skills and concepts, then we want to move on to more advanced skills and concepts. Whereas if students are struggling with the skills, we want to reteach them. Focusing on various enrichment and remediation activities can help create a more individualized classroom instruction setting. Enrichment activities in the science classroom could be more in-depth or complex labs, focusing on the concepts or skills learned, or they could be enrichment projects, letting students choose the media they want to do a project in instead of the normal project for most of the students. Remediation activities could include small group activities, reading groups, or skill remediation groups where a group practices a specific skill. So for instance, I had a small group of students struggling with using Punnett squares during our genetics unit, and so during our review, those students focused on Punnett squares, and we're in a small group setting where they have lots of Punnett square problems to practice. Individualized instruction is something that many classrooms are starting to work towards. We've talked about differentiation for years in education, and I think it's really important to focus on those small groups and those individualized students. A quote by Howard Gardner says, "The biggest mistake of past centuries in teaching has been to treat all children as if they were variants of the same individual, and thus to feel justified in teaching them the same subjects in the same ways." Gardner couldn't be more right. If we focus on teaching the whole class the same way, we're going to miss students that learn differently. There are 3 different types of learners: auditory, kinesthetic, and visual. However, we've got those 3 types, but a lot of times most students are a blending of those 3 types. So it's really important that we tailor our lessons to meet all of those needs, and that we use our formative assessment to also focus on the content and skill being needed at the moment. So individualized instruction, a classroom that is set up for individualized instruction, understands that students can teach and teachers can learn. Students need to be able to help each other and teach each other and hold each other accountable for their learning, and teachers need to be open to the fact that they may learn from their students' needs in order to develop better instruction in the future. We need to create an environment where our students feel challenged academically and respected personally. This increases our overall student accountability for themselves and their classmates, and it creates opportunities of success for all levels of learners. Sometimes we have students in our classrooms who aren't used to being successful. By creating individualized instruction, you're creating opportunities of success for those students. When students feel success, they then want to do the same things to achieve that success over and over again. So then you're not only increasing success, but you're increasing student motivation, which increases overall student learning. So like I said, I'm a high school teacher currently, so I interviewed an 8th grade language arts and social studies teacher, Kristen Phillips. I asked her what type of formative assessments she used and what she felt worked well with middle school students. She said she used exit tickets after every class, she did weekly quizzes to check for overall understanding, and she used sign language letters. I thought that was something really neat, that she incorporated an interest in ASL signs and kind of passed it along to her students. She also said that her 8th grade team, uses a 6 traits writing rubric student tracker. The 6 traits of writing are a state standard in Arizona, and students use this to see their mastery of the concepts, and they use it to plan for studying in the future. I thought it was really important that not only did Kristen use the trackers for students to see how they're doing, but also to take accountability on their own studying. When I asked Kristen about how she uses the data, she actually said something interesting. She groups students by their reading and critical thinking abilities for small group discussions of the text read in class. So if they do something the previous day, she'll use the exit ticket data, group them accordingly, and then have them discuss the material the next day. I thought that was really great, and Kristen has a lot of great ideas that can be incorporated in really any level of course or any level of school, but I especially thought it was neat that she was doing this stuff with middle school students, showing that these middle school students can be accountable for their own learning, take pride in their own learning, and do work well on a more individualized and small group basis. So in my current classroom, I do use formative assessments on a weekly basis. I do weekly quizzes for vocab and concepts. So we have content quizzes weekly and vocab quizzes weekly. I also use How Did Today Go folders. So as you can see on the picture on the right, it says got it, almost, kind of, and nope. So my students fill out exit tickets. And after they fill out the exit ticket explaining what we learned that day, they also place it in a folder stating whether or not they got it and how they feel on the lesson. I've also done questioning and free response questions. My future applications are, I want to focus on creating more individualized learning opportunities. So I think that by using student learning objectives, I can create more personalized objectives for small groups or individualized students. And I can use those formative assessments to drive to a mastery level of skills and place an emphasis on each skill before moving on. So I really want to focus on doing more small group work with remediation and enrichment activities. This whole research activity led me to one future question. Basically, yes, formative assessment is important for us to use, and we need to be monitoring our students. However, how can we, as educators, utilize formative assessments to drive individualized instruction while also staying within the constraints of our calendar and curriculum? Something I'd like to look at in the future. Here are my works cited. Thank you for joining me in my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. Please let me know if you have any questions.